What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Primal Baseball podcast. If you haven't done so already, you should go follow us at Primal Baseball, PRIMALBSBL on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and we got a lot of new content coming out. So if you would like to follow us, go ahead and follow us on all our social media platforms. Today, I have another guest. I have Ted Bezimer from Axio Training, and we're going to get into a conversation on a lot of different topics, mostly training, but a little bit about baseball and pitching performance as well. So, Ted, thanks for coming on, and I'll let you introduce yourself even further.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jordy. So my name is Ted Bezimer. I'm a orthopedic and sports clinical specialist in physical therapy. I'm also a strength coach. Been doing this a long time, about 30 years actually in PT, and even a little longer as a strength coach. And several years ago, I injured my shoulder pretty badly, and wanted to avoid a major surgery and wanted to actually come back even stronger and developed a device called Axio, which is a rotational training device that's gained a lot of popularity, particularly in baseball, but really for really all overhead athletes in a variety of sports.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start is just your background in physical therapy and strength and conditioning. I know, at least from my experience in baseball, a lot of coaches are either one or the other. And how did that kind of merge together for you? How did the strength and conditioning side and the physical therapy side kind of combine? And then why is that an advantage um, over just having the one?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. So I started as I started as a strength coach for quite a while, and when you're in the industry long enough, you come across things that you don't necessarily understand why someone's hurting or what's causing the problem or injuries and things like that, and it just kind of bothered me. I just never wanted to not know what I was doing or randomly throw darts at trying to help people, and so I wanted to dig deeper. And so, as I think we spoke before, I did pre med. Well, my undergrad degree is actually more in finance and business. And
Yep.
then I went back to school and did pre med at Northeastern.
Okay. Yep.
And then went to grad school and got my master's in physical therapy at Mass General. So, and I think the combination is it's actually great because I think to your point, we are seeing more people with kind of a combination of the perspective of a strength coach or a performance coach and training, with also a rehab component, which I think is really good because it gives you a perspective from both sides. And I think a lot of people who like when I was a strength coach, I just didn't know what was going on the other side. I just basically just did stuff and crossed my fingers and hope things worked out. And fortunately, strengthening things quite often helps. But it made me feel much more complete and much more comfortable when I could actually see it from both sides and say that combination I think is really the key. And I think, like I said, you're seeing more people who have some degree of exposure in both, or one more than the other. But yeah, it's been really really helpful for me. And like I said, it's from my perspective as someone who also is a rehab specialist. I would say I'm also bringing a much bigger strength component to it than a lot of my counterpart PTs who just do rehab. And Axio is kind of a product of that because basically, even though I was injured, I didn't want to make a rehab tool. I didn't want to. No one wants to be rehabbing. Like I wanted
Right.
to be like
Right. Yeah.
basically better training. I wanted to get back to playing baseball, hockey, throwing a ball with my son, and really wanted to be even better. And so Axio is really the product of really taking a rehab concept, bringing up more of a neuromuscular component of dynamic stability component, but pouring some gas on it and adding actually a strength component because we tend to sacrifice one for the other, whether we're rehabbing or training. And the truth is that we shouldn't. We really shouldn't. We want to actually develop that whole system, and that's kind of what Axio does. If anything, it actually humbles people because it's much more strenuous. They think it's going to be a low level rehab type tool. And then they put their hands on it and they're like, oh man, this thing is much more sturdy and much more potent and challenging and strenuous than they ever think.
Yeah, and I think one of the things when I was looking over Axio and just looking through the website and the videos and all that stuff was just the predictability aspect of it, like having a tool or having something that may not give you the same stimulus over and over every single time. And I think that's really cool. And I think that not only relates to like whether you're rehabbing or training, but also when you're actually out there on the mound, like you're not going to get the same
Mhm.
thing over and over and over. So almost practicing things that are you
Hmm.
were going to have to deal with on the mound before you get on the mound. That's what I really like about it, and maybe
Mhm.
you could talk to the predictability of it and why we should be training the body to adapt and adjust on a dime and not just have this set over and over stimulus that's going to be the same every single time.
Yeah, I think that's a great parody there you're making because performance is variable, right? And so you can't control things. So when we train, especially like when we look at just even training a joint like the shoulder, for example, when we train it in a very linear fashion, you know, you could argue you're just going to get linear results. It is when you have a joint that's so unstable and mobile and moving at such a high rate of speed, the more dynamic and the more variable the forces are, actually, the better, because it's not just about generating strength in one direction. It's about being able to coordinate strength and be able to coordinate our force and even be able to sense forces better. To your point, the best athletes, the best performers actually can sense and coordinate their tension the best. That's why they perform the best, the most efficiently, the most consistently, and they're usually the least hurt. So Axio was basically my solution to my own shoulder problem, realizing that, you know, I mean, I had a body blade in my hand, you know, basically the next day after I dislocated and tore my labrum up in my cuff. And I was like, this is just not enough resistance. And it's in a linear, predictable fashion. It's look, it's fine for someone who's at a low level, but I'm like, well, I'm not at a low level. I want to train this thing, and I really want to get really, really strong and really, really stable. And so that's when I used a rotational resistance. And what I found is that you have to kind of drive it. You can't just it just doesn't go on its own. And that mass moving around makes it very unpredictable. And it just so happens, aside from the performance side of things, the research that I probably sent you, actually, I think we were talking about, is about developing muscle synergy patterns. And so basically, I'll get into too much into it. Muscle synergies in the body are, you know, our body's ability to actually coordinate muscles to work together as a unit, right? So nothing works in isolation, obviously. And so the better you are at, say, throwing a baseball, hitting a baseball, running, whatever, you have these muscle synergies. And so if you're really good at something and efficient, you have fewer synergy patterns, meaning there's less muscles that basically work to make this happen. The problem is that when we fatigue, when we're injured, when we don't train optimally, we don't develop these synergy patterns and make them smaller, basically. So an example would be a really good golfer who's got a great swing has very few muscle synergy patterns. A new golfer who's never picked up a golf club before and it looks like they're chopping wood, they have a lot of muscle synergy. So each time they swing the club, it's completely different. And so we want this repeatability. And so the research shows that by improving our muscle synergy patterns, which is about strengthening to some degree, but in a very dynamic way, very unpredictable and variable way, we can hone these synergy patterns to make us move more efficiently, prevent injury, perform better, keep our joints stable, things like that. So, and so they say it really hits on all levels of, from a performance standpoint, of being able to adapt and be able to coordinate tension in variable environments, to actually really how our muscles and our joints function optimally, which is really coordinating our force best. It's not just moving a weight linearly. It's not just moving bands in IR, ER, and doing this stuff that really develops that system, you know?
Yeah, and one of the other we're going to be using, just a heads up, we're going to be to the listeners, we're going to be using some terms that you might not have heard before. So muscle synergies is probably one of them, but another one that I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that I keep seeing come up is neuromuscular control, and I
Mhm.
wanted to know why it's so important to have high degrees of coordination and how that neuromuscular control can help us reduce injury and and increase performance.
Yeah, so that is a big word, and it really encompasses a lot of things. So I think another big word that's, I would say, finds itself more so in the, even in the fitness world and certainly in the performance world, is proprioception, which is basically our body's ability to sense where we are in space. So if I'm, looking at you, I know that my right foot's turned out over here without even looking at it. My body's giving me constant feedback. And so that's a system in our body that really it really shouldn't be overlooked, because our ability to sense where we are in space has everything to do with how our ability to actually coordinate movement and be able to manipulate force and tension. So you could argue that the best performers, the best movers in any sport, they're not the strongest, and clearly they're not the strongest.
Right.
As much as we might like to think they are, they're not. They're the ones who actually coordinate, sense, and coordinate their force the best. They can use their strength the best. And so this is really where you start to bring in this idea of our neuromuscular control. So, analogy would be like, muscles are really just kind of, you know, they really don't know what to do unless something's telling them what to do. They're not really smart. There's no this muscle memory thing, and as if muscles have brains is really not accurate. It's really our nervous system that tells the muscles what to do, when to work the gas, when to work the brakes, when to kind of coordinate that tension. And so it'd be like you have in your phone. Well, you could have like basically you can have a low level internet connection. You can have high speed. We want to have the software in the body that actually can use our muscles most optimally. The best athletes have the best software, and so consequently, it is our neuromuscular system that really gets the most out of our muscles. Um, and so, for example, even with Axio, like I get lots of strong athletes I work with who can move a ton of weight. They can deadlift a ton, and they can, I mean, they're strong and they
Right.
test very strong, and that bucket of strength is really filled pretty much to the top. But then you ask them to move or coordinate tension or spin an Axio, and they just throw random force at it,
Yeah.
hoping that it's going to carry over. And this, throwing a baseball 95 is not just about throwing force. It's about coordinating force to get it to move through the system. So yeah, I think that the more we can develop neuromuscular components in our training, in addition to some strength training, of course, I think it yields better results. Not only performance wise, but also to prevent injury. And like I said, that was the whole reason I made Axio. Is I wanted something that had more strength, because I want to strength train with much more neuromuscular benefit. Because I think the stuff right now that we've been using for years, these are generally rehab tools that have made their way into the world of performance in sports. And so we use these low level devices thinking they're going to give us these high returns. And the truth is they don't. They end up being warm up tools and just to get warm. But we want to develop this system. We need to train it to make it perform optimally. So that's where Axio really, really shines.
Yeah, and to touch on, a similar idea that I'm just hearing from you is the strongest guy like is not necessarily going to be the guy who's throwing the hardest. Like it's a different game as much as you want to see the correlation exactly between strength between being in the weight room and being the guy who deadlifts the most or benches the most. There's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be a correlation. Maybe there is for like some certain guys, like that's how they throw. They're just so strong. But for a lot of guys, sometimes even the strength will take away from your movement and
Yeah.
from your
Good.
patterns and sequencing. Like um,
Yep. Yep.
it can
Yep.
even be a detriment. It can have your performance almost plummet because you're so strong and you can't move through these positions. So it's always a balance. There's always, like you said, I really like the bucket analogy. I try to use that also. There's all these, you can think of it as you have like however many buckets you want. I will say three for now, but it's like there's one strength, one explosive, one we'll just say like mechanics, right? And if you fill up the strength all the way, the other two
Mm-hmm.
buckets are going to be a little bit low. So if you can maybe balance them out and pour some of the strength into the other two buckets, when you have these buckets that are more balanced, now you can try to raise them all at once. But if you have uneven buckets, then we might have an issue because there's so much strength, not enough mobility. That might cause injury. That might cause lower performance. So just making sure that we can have strength. I don't want to say you don't want strength because that's you want to be. Everybody wants to be strong. I want to be strong. I want to be fast. But there's more than just the strength. There's other components to the throw, to the performance of pitching or baseball or whatever other sport you're going to use through Axio or whatever. tools you're going to use. There's more than just this strength and conditioning. So I think that's a really important piece to touch on, especially to the younger guys. I know it's from going through it myself, even in college, it was kind of just me like on this one path, like, oh, if I get really strong, I'm gonna throw hard, and maybe you see the results for about a month or two, and then it starts to hit that peak and then maybe go back down a little bit. So it's just about having that balance of strength and conditioning. But yeah, that's just one thing that I wanted to go back over and touch on.
That's honestly like you probably saw the smile on my face when you started to go there. That is like super insightful that you pick up on that because like for two reasons. One is that there's a great analogy. Mike Boyle, you probably know who Mike Boyle is, right? So really really sharp guy, great strength coach, and so um, he says strength is the story that strength coaches tell themselves. And so like basically when the argument would be like to develop power, I need to be strong to develop power or something like that, or I need to be strong to throw hard. But, you know, I could think of a lot of people who I used to play basketball with who could dunk a basketball and I could move a ton more weight than these guys. And I was much stronger than them, but they could dunk, they could throw hard, they could vertical better than me, and so we look to strength quite often because there's a nice objective metric to look at. What do you bench? What do you squat? What do you deadlift? And we focus on these metrics and the analogy certainly in like a medical approach would be like we're treating the symptom we're treating the temperature. We're not really treating what the source is and what the problem is. And then to your other point you made, I thought was really really smart, is we learn things from what we do. So like if you're just moving weight, you can actually ingrain bad movement patterns. As much as I'm a huge deadlifting fan, I mean, I deadlift basically every athlete I train. Really, I can't think of many I don't. I don't back squat every athlete I train, that's for sure, but I definitely deadlift them. Uh, you can actually improve a bad pattern. I could take even a golfer or something like that, and I start having them doing deadlift kettlebell swings, and then next thing you know, they're early extending in their golf swing and they're coming out of their rotation. So, same thing could happen swinging a bat. So, our nervous system, or we should reflect on what does our body learn from our training, and so we can ingrain these bad patterns that then don't carry over well to our sport as well. So, and then lastly, like I said, it is about feeding what needs to be fed. Like if you're incrementally you're 90% full in that strength bucket, well, I probably shouldn't be spending much more time on the strength. I should be going after these other things, whether it be you need more some mobility or you need more timing, mechanics, neuromuscular system. I mean, I would develop the other things because that's really where you're going to get your best return, you know? And so it is good to kind of not cookie cutter it and be thoughtful about this stuff. And like I said, where Axio falls in is basically a tool that really kind of gets a little bit of everything, really. And it's just we're trying to make athletes make their nervous system, their strength and their neuromuscular system more robust. The more robust we can make it, the more dynamic, adaptable, the better. The better their tools are to compete and perform.
Yeah, and when you're using Axio, is it more of a warm up, a post throw? What is like when are the
Mhm.
times that you can implement this into your training to
Yeah.
allow the benefits? Like maybe you want to.
Yeah. So because in baseball, like baseball is very fixated on warm up. Pitchers particularly, they have their warm up routines. So Axio instantly is pictured as being like warm up. I used to do like a bunch of body blade and shoulder tube. That's how I get warm, and so players are always thinking warm up. And I think that's a very unfortunately, it's a big mistake. It's actually to look at it as a warm up tool and to think that your warm up is really what's going to have a significant effect on your outcome and your performance and even injury prevention. I mean, everyone talks warm up, warm up, warm up. But I'll tell you right now, if you really want to prevent injury, it all comes down to what you do 6 weeks before you perform, not 6 minutes with any warm up. I mean, even Nolan Ryan in his in that great video of Nolan Ryan talking about his greatest no hitter, and they asked him what he remembered about the game. And he's like, well, I remember having a shitty warm up. So the warm up had nothing to do with the outcome of the game. It really doesn't. I mean, maybe mentally it gets someone prepared to get some routine and a rhythm and all that. But if you really want to develop these things, if you want to get stronger and get better neuromuscularly and be able to coordinate tension more, you should train with this. So But yeah, you can warm up with it too. It's great. And you can recover with it too. It's great for that. It does it all. And it's basically 3 pounds and fits in your bag. But an example of training would be going back to, like, say, deadlifting, for example. With my athletes, I get someone, they're deadlifting, and whether I have pairs or I have groups, they're deadlifting. Once they're done with their deadlift, they drop down. If they're an overhead athlete, I might put them in a side plank and have them do an arm bar and rotate this thing while they're in a side plank and integrate it with some core type stuff. So they're getting a recovery from the deadlift. They're getting some neuromuscular component. It's actually neuroexcitatory, so it amps the nervous system, which helps them with their deadlift, and it integrates shoulder core together, because that's what we need. We don't need to isolate, individual little muscles to do this stuff. This gets everything. It's not just shoulder. It makes your core work. It makes you use your force into the ground and back to the axio. It makes you use your ground reaction force. And people who actually are not connected well will lose control of the ball in here that you're rotating. It'll clank around and move. So definitely number one, and I'm always preaching this, and I can't do enough videos about it. This is a training tool that can be used for warm up and recovery. That's really how it should be best used.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And as we're talking about warm up and recovery, one of the big things for a lot of players is going too hard in the warm up and the recovery.
Mm.
And I I don't know if you can talk a little bit about like how we can balance up. I know you said the Axio is more training device that you can implement with
Mm-hmm.
different exercises that you're using. It can be an addition and just something to kind of progressively overload an exercise. Like you can add the Axio in so it's a little bit harder, and you have to stabilize and coordinate better. But as you're going through a warm up and recovery, I just maybe you could touch on the significance of not of using the warm up and recovery as they're supposed to be made, right? Like sometimes and I'm speaking from personal experience, this is more for
Yeah.
me too. I love I like exercises, I like doing the warm ups, I like the recovery, I like the process of it. But sometimes the warm up, I go too much and then I'm fatigued for the actual performance. And then sometimes when the performance is over, I like the recovery, so I go too much and then I'm not able to recover properly. So how are we able to balance the warm up and the recovery? How fatigued should we actually be before we get ready to throw? And then once we throw, how much more fatigue and stress should we put on our arm and our bodies?
Yeah, so that's a big question, and I had a feeling you were talking about your own perspective
Yeah.
and experience with it. It's funny you say that, because like when I made this, and I made it for training. I mean, I made it because I wanted to actually strengthen my shoulder better than using a blade or bands and just stuff like that. I
Yep.
wanted something that was more potent,
Yep.
and it really is. But people were thinking warm up. And so right away, and it's funny he says, because right away I'm like thinking, holy crap, what's going to happen is someone's going to like start spinning this thing. And in 30 seconds, they're going to be like, their arm is going to be hanging,
Yeah.
because I mean, when I go and present this at conferences and stuff like that, or ABCA or any of these guys, and I get people put their hands this thing, they're like, wow, I've never felt my shoulder feel this way before, is the first thing they'll say. That's a classic one. And then the other one that's really kind of funny is then, and this was actually, I think I was at World Baseball at Mohegan Sun out back in New England. And and one guy like spin it for like 15 seconds, and he comes back over like 15 minutes later. He's like, dude, I still feel that in my shoulder. And I did it like 15 minutes ago for like 20 seconds. So my fear with this from a warm-up standpoint is actually over fatiguing someone. And so the answer to that is you don't want to be fatigued at all.
Yep.
Because when we become fatigued, not only do our muscles actually not generate force as well, but our nervous system, our neuromuscular system deteriorates. Back when I played high school basketball, if I went in the gym and like hammered arms and then went out to the court and started working on free throws, I'm like throwing air balls and bricks. I got no feel.
Yep.
So there is a sweet spot there, and I wish I could say this is what we should do. This
Right.
is what you should do. This is what you should do. But I think it really is very individualized, and it's going to take trial and error. I'm sure you figured out. Okay, that was too much. That was not enough, and you got to kind of figure it out. We do have an Axio 8 warm up, a thrower's warm up routine on the website for ball players. And out of the 8 things that are involving this, I think you're spinning this only like 3 or 4 of them. So we'll use it as a prop for halos, for mobility stuff, for some torso rotation, forearm stuff. But if I gave someone 8 different things to do with this and they rip this for 30 seconds, I mean, it will noodle them. It really
Yeah.
could, depending on their level. And then as far as recovery goes, you know, the idea behind recovery is really to not do too much. The idea behind recovery is to increase capillary refill and flush. So circulation without load, so, um, there's, the idea is like, go for a jog afterwards, things like that, that just basically increase systemic circulation. With this, I don't know if it's on the website right now, but with the Axio, our recovery routine is more like pendulums with this, or walking around in the field, just spinning it down by your side so gravity's minimized. Because if I'm holding this thing out at 90 degrees and it only weighs 3 pounds, but it punches about 15 when I'm rotating it, and you just threw 6 innings, you're going to be like,
Yeah.
you're not going to like it. It's not going to help you recover. It'll make you feel worse.
Yeah.
So really, we want low load, and we want low velocity also, because we just want to open up the capillaries in our muscles to help with basically opening up the train tracks to move things in and out. We don't want to create constriction and basically not allow the body to do what it's designed to do. I'm not a big proponent of icing things,
Right.
for that reason, unless you really need to help with some pain. But the body's designed to recover quite often if we just get out of its way,
Yep.
So like I said, warm up, not too much. Be careful. It's really subjective to what works for the athlete. Recovery, even less than not too much. You really don't want to do too much. This is down here, gravity minimized, and just like I said, low, walking around, moving, just getting circulation better.
Yeah. And Axio does a great job at almost creating a feel for us to move from our core. And I think that that's a really important thing to learn as a pitcher or an athlete, whatever sport you're in, like learning to move from the inside of your body out. Because I think a lot of times, and I've used this on the podcast multiple times, but I hear like, and it's, just a saying. So for me to talk about it, I know nobody really means it when they say it, but like when you say like, "Oh, this guy has a great arm," like it's not necessarily maybe the arm that's actually the the thing that's making him
Right.
throw so hard. Like that's just a general saying. I say it all the time
Yeah.
too, but it's like what it really means is this guy is like an athlete. He has good rhythm and he's has good patterns and he's able to move through positions. Because if you have the strongest arm, like we talked about earlier, it, a dude that has the most jacked arm is not going to throw the hardest. It's not about the strength, like we
Mm-hmm.
mentioned before, but it's really like being able to take that energy, obviously from the ground and have that ground force, but also being able to take the energy from the middle of your body and kind of extend that out. And
Mm-hmm.
a big thing with all the links and the research and the videos from Axio is just the core. Everything is stabilized because of the core, and it's coming from the inside, maybe the center of mass, like closer to your center of mass, and then
Mm-hmm.
being able to go out. But you have to control that center of mass first. So maybe you could talk about why controlling our center mass is so important, especially for pitchers and athletes.
Yeah, so yeah, the comment, he has a good arm versus he uses his arm well, right?
Yeah.
So, like you're right. We wanted the best movers, best performers generate their force from the middle. I do think the word our core gets a lot of credit for things, and then the problem is I think the way we train it is also really not always what really helps us move better or do better, because the cores become this separate kind of entity. And I should say this, when I made this, I wasn't thinking like how this affects my whole body when I developed this. I was really just trying to solve a shoulder problem specifically and make a shoulder more dynamically stable and stronger. But what I learned, in time, very quickly actually, is that it the Axio is unique in that it really forces you to use your middle muscles, we'll say, core, hips, really everything that connects you to the ground. And it makes you have to use it in a very reactive kind of coordinated way. You can't just stiffen. to make it happen, because when we just stiffen, we don't transfer force well. That's like bracing. It'd be like, when you see people holding their arms out, and people doing like isometrics on them and stuff like that and pushing on them, that's not really teaching our nervous system to actually kind of work the gas and the brakes and transfer force. It's just teaching us just to lock down. And as you point out, locking down does not allow you to actually transfer force to your arm and to a ball or to a bat. So Axio is unique in that by rotating this thing, there's a constant communication. Whereas I'm spinning this thing just with my right arm, I could do two hands, whatever. This force is now coming down through. It's coming from my middle first to my shoulder, and then it goes back to the chair I'm sitting in. And there's this constant volley of force back and forth. So, you know, our middle creates the force. We put force into the ground, and that force travels back through the system to the implement, whatever it may be: ball, glove, bat, golf club, whatever. So Axio really develops that ability to do that. And I've watched many athletes, especially with lower body disconnects, left leg, right leg, lead leg, plant leg, all that kind of stuff, where you'll see them be pretty controlled with this in one position, and we switch them, and they actually lose control, and they fumble it around, and they even lose their balance. And it basically, it will show you how people like to use their ground reaction force and who can and who can't. It's actually kind of interesting. I use it even with my lower body athletes. I use it with high level skiers, because it will develop that system of being able to coordinate tension using the ground efficiently,
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I, it almost seems sometimes that we get the steps wrong or the foundations wrong. It seems like when we're looking to better our performance in today's world, we go right. We sign up for the gym, or we sign up to go to a facility that's gonna give us a lifting program and give us a throwing program. But it's almost as if we skip like the foundational step of just like learning how to move our body and be an athlete. It's almost like if right, you're talking about coordination and balance and rhythm and athleticism and the disconnects between your lower half, your upper half. If we don't know like how if we don't know what it feels like to move athletically within our body, the weight room might not necessarily be the place that's going to like give us all of our benefits. Like just squatting up and down, obviously the weight room has changed a lot, and performance is no longer squat bench clean. It's obviously changed, and
Mm-hmm.
for the better. But still,
Yeah.
if you don't know how to move your body like outside playing, there's going to be some issues. And that's why I recommend, if you're a pitcher, especially for the pitchers that are being pitchers only at such a young age, like go play shortstop, go shag fly balls, because that's going to allow you to create that proprioception and
Yeah.
understanding of how your body's moving, and just bring you athleticism and some sort of coordination and balance and body control. But and I'm not trying to say that you're going to gain 5 miles an hour by going and taking ground balls, but it's part of the piece. And I think we need to have that foundation. That is not going to replace the lifting, but it's going to be in addition to. We need to make sure that that piece is being taken care of, as well as the lifting stuff. I think sometimes we skip those steps, and I don't know if you see that in your day to day, or if you've seen that over the last couple of years as people have got more into strength and conditioning. But that's just something that I see sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think well, I mean, after like I've been in this field for a long time, so and the bar has definitely risen more into more of this kind of, hey, we need to. I mean, back in the day, we were just basically hammering out leg extensions and leg curls and leg press and hoping that no one blew out an ACL or something like that, or expected it to carry over well on the football field. And we kind of, so clearly we're, there's some smarter people behind this, and there's some
Yeah.
research behind it and stuff like that. But even yet, the problem is that what is the problem? The problem, I'd say, is that there's still we people still want to do what they want to do, and then we want to believe what we want to believe based on what we do. So I mean, even with this, I get people who, they do like a body blade or something like that, and then they put their hand on this thing and they're kind of clunking it around. They can't do it, and they're like, I can't do it. I'll just do the body blade instead. And so right there, what they just had in their mind was, they're like, okay, well, I can't do this, so it's probably not worth doing. And this I can do, and it does the same thing, is what they're rationalizing.
Yep.
So they just do the same thing. I'll just squat. I don't need the deadlift. I'll just squat. I don't need to do single leg work. because that's hard. I'll do double leg work. Or like, so we have these constant little personal battles where we go through and you know, or this cognitive dissonance of like what, you know, what we rationalize. And so the truth is that we really should challenge ourselves in as many different ways as we can. To your point, you know, field ground balls, catch balls, dive for things, do as many different things as you can, even if it doesn't look specifically like what you really want to do, because the more you do that stuff, the better your nervous system becomes. I mean, it really, we're just trying to give you as much nutrition to use your muscles in different ways as possible. And I think it's especially important for younger athletes because that's when our nervous system is most robust. That's what we can learn the most. You know, we get older, it gets a lot harder to pick up new things. But when we're young, our nervous system is like a sponge. We can, like, you know, we learn language better, we learn music better. Well, we also learn to move better. So, you know, as much as I'm a fan of loading things and I want to create strength, you know, we really shouldn't be so naive to think that just, you know, moving weight in a linear fashion is going to carry over in a very dynamic fashion. You know.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's all I really had for today's convo and everything that I wanted to cover. Maybe we could bring this into this is just more for me, and maybe the listeners will get a little bit of something out of it. But
Mm-hmm.
when I was going through the Axio stuff and the research and the studies, there were some words that stood out to me and that
Yeah.
I would personally like to understand deeper. So maybe I could give you there's only like three or four of them. You already tackled proprioception, but there's two or three words that I was hoping to get a little bit of a maybe like a layman's term or something a little bit
Yeah.
simpler to digest on. So I'll just give you one at a time. But the first one was we actually talked about this before, but centripetal force.
Yeah. Yeah. So centripetal force is kind of interesting. So like, well, first of all, if you take like a body blade, for example, that's a linear force, right? So when you move a body blade back and forth, which, you know, we're all familiar with, that force is in one direction. Even if I shake water,
Yep.
which is obviously very popular, it's still in one direction. It's not constantly changing and it's unpredictable as many people say it is. Even though I know water is unpredictable, water is actually very predictable. It'll flow downhill and it'll go where it wants to go. So water is very predictable and it's still affected directly by gravity.
Yep.
Okay, so the way this works and the reason why this is better certainly for our shoulders and more dynamic is that inside here there's a half-pound weight. This is the 360. It's our most popular model. It's a half-pound weight and it's in a resisted channel. Now, when I go to rotate this around, I need to apply a force that is rotating that mass around. And what happens is the device is actually creating a centripetal force. It's pushing the ball back to the middle. So if you were driving in your car and you made a left turn and you start to slide to the right door of your car, well, the car door is pushing you back to the middle. That's applying a centripetal force, moving things to the middle. And the neat thing about that, what it does is that if I want to rotate a mass around a rotational system, I have to apply about 5 times the force to double the speed. So it makes it very potent. It makes the 3-pound Axio punch really hard. It's surprisingly strenuous, even though gravitationally it's only 3 pounds.
Right.
Um, Inside here is also a resistance, though, so it's just not going to go on its own. I need to actually muscle it to get it to move. It'll stop. So rotation in different directions, all these different things create different forces, and it's constantly changing because as that mass moves, probably the best way to show it is with the 720. So if I rotate this with both hands, right, and I got both these weights going, and I let go, you see how that jumps?
Yep.
So what's happening is that is trying to pull my arm out of the socket. It's literally trying to pull it in different directions out. Your rotator cuff muscles, there are 4 of them, they keep that sucker in there. They keep that from moving. So certainly for throwers, the reason why every MLB organization uses these now is because it is keeping that humeral head in better control in a very dynamic way. It's not just one muscle, it's all 4 need to work to keep that from translating,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, so centripetal, you know, is that's really the sweet. That's the reason why these centripetal trainers, we call them that. It's a mouthful, but you're using 360 degrees of resistance versus just gravity or one directional forces.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be like taking our knee out, a guy we're gonna, you know, our football player, and either doing leg extensions and leg curls and leg press in one direction versus I'm going to cut them and plant them and rotational lunge them and bound them and things like that, which is really what research shows is most effective.
The next one I got is internal angular resistance.
Yeah. So basically what we're talking about is inside here, right? So it's, first of all, it's intentionally not see-through. I don't want you to be able to see that ball. I want you to be able to feel it, right? That's the proprioception part. But that ball in here, this is pliable. It's rubber. And so it creates a resistance to move the ball around. It's called an angular or rotational resistance. So angular is the same thing as rotational. To rotate this around, there's gravity, but then there's also a rotational or angular resistance because that ball wants to stop. And in fact, on slow motion, you can see in some videos, this actually teardrops as the mass is moving around. So it grabs the ball and it slows it down. So it creates resistance, which is why it's really so strenuous to do. You know?
Yep, yep. And that was the only. I think you already talked about gravitational resistance a little bit, right? But yeah, so,
Yeah, like a dumbbell,
yeah,
like a free weight, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's all I had. Now I kind of want to move, or I'm gonna move on to the rapid fire questions. So it's just me giving you a quick question, and then you answering the first thing that comes to mind. Uh, favorite book.
All right. Favorite book. Wow. Probably one of the first books I ever read, The Hobbit.
All right. Favorite memory. This can be if you played baseball, it can be from baseball. If not, just sports in general. But favorite memory from baseball.
Favorite memory from baseball was I think I was probably like double A pitcher, and some kid was coming home, and of course the catcher dropped the ball. I put it right over the plate, and he went to go get it on the backstop, threw it to me, and I dropped my tag and tagged the guy between my legs. Never looked at him, and he slid right into my tag.
All right, that's perfect.
Double
Favorite
A, you know.
favorite food.
Favorite food? Buffalo wings.
Okay.
I'm from Buffalo originally, so.
Okay. Yep. What is some this again, we can skip to the end if you need a little time, but what is something uncomfortable that you want to start doing in order to grow?
Wow. You know, the truth is actually, Axio has been something that's been uncomfortable. That has actually really helped me grow because, being in working in healthcare and working with athletes one on one and in small group stuff, to all of a sudden create something and then put it out there and then, you know, have to go and present it and kind of explain it and just the
Yeah.
constant, like, it's just a never ending thing.
Yeah.
That's been actually been one of the coolest things about it because I've met a lot of really great people and it's really energized me in a lot of ways. I really enjoy doing it. So never expected that to be what it was going to be, but by far that has probably been led to some of the greatest growth I've had in my career.
Something you often forget you're grateful for.
Something I often forget I'm grateful for. Well, I think, grateful just in general for my family, for my wife and my kids. It's easy to kind of get focused on work and your profession and trying to actually create something, and you get caught in your routine of just day to day of doing that stuff. And then, for me, like the things I love doing the best are, I mean, I just went and watched my son play hockey last night. I love watching my kids do
Yeah.
things. And so I would do that, I'd do that forever and ever and ever, like a loop. I would never want to stop ever doing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Best or best life lesson baseball has taught you.
Well, I don't know if it taught me much when I played, to be honest with you, because I don't think I was that insightful. But now that my product is popular in baseball, I'm around a lot of very much smarter baseball guys than I am actually, and so the cool thing for me is I've learned so much more about baseball, and I would say one of the cool things about baseball, as I look at it, and I didn't realize when I was younger, is it teaches or it reminds me to enjoy the process, and that because it's not about success, and it's about just basically continuing to go through and appreciate the process of getting better at things, recognizing that success is not just instantly going to happen. And I even use that parody when I explain it Axio to people, because people think they're going to pick this thing up and they're going to be like a pro at it, and it's like, no, you don't just pick up a jump rope and start ripping it like Rocky the first time you try it. You gotta develop and learn and practice and do the reps. And so um, that I think is the special sauce, is actually learning to be okay with the process and appreciating kind of the journey, because success isn't always something you can control, So, but you can control putting in the work and putting in the time, and basically being dedicated to try to get better at something.
Advice to your 5-year-old self.
Boy, 5-year-old self. Uh, uh, Play more guitar, play drums, play guitar. Um, probably hit the weight room when I younger than I started lifting weights at 6.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, yeah, I mean, I think probably, like, looking back, I think I could have been I could have been a more successful athlete if I was okay with the work that I would have needed to put into it. Like, I was a good young athlete in a bunch of sports, but I never kind of was ready to, like, really. So back, I always kind of wonder, I could have been a pretty decent ball player. I could have been a really good tennis player, basketball player. I just didn't really kind of figure it out until I was older.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So
all I have for the rapid fire, but I want to give this time for you just to tell all the listeners where they can find you on social media or other places, and just yeah.
yeah. So to learn more about Axio, axiotraining.com is the website. Axiotraining.com, and then Instagram at Axio Training, Facebook, all that stuff at Axio Training. I always let people know, hey, if you message me on my website, you message me on Instagram, you're getting me. So you're getting me directly to talk to. I always like I said, one of the cool things about this that I never really, I kind of thought, well, you're gonna design this, manufacture it, and that's the work. But really, what I really enjoy is the conversations and, like, people reaching out and answering questions and meeting people. I met hundreds of strength coaches, hundreds of guys in baseball, that I never would have met, if it wasn't for this. And so yeah, like I said, feel free to reach out anytime with questions. You're going to get me. And like I said, I like the dialogue, and I answer everything I get from players and all that stuff who reach out. So yeah, axiotraining.com.
Well, that's all we got for today's podcast. If you would like to be a guest, or somebody that would be a good guest, please reach out to us at Primal Baseball, PRIMALBSBL at gmail.com. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And Ted, thanks for coming on and sharing your knowledge with everybody.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for having me, bud.